This is forbidden history that the so-called government/control mind doesn't want you to know. Based on the comments and behavior of people all over North America as it is known, the United States Inc. is revered, dare we say worshipped, unlike any other corporation on the soil in the Western Hemisphere of computer-simulated flat plane Earth, commonly referred to as America. The reasons for this are many, but few of them have to do with anything remotely dealing with truth and reality. The majority of those who unwittingly call themselves Americans know very little about any real history of the United States, including the nature of the incident that sparked the war for independence and the true outcome of that war. As you will discover, it was not about the tax on tea. Our heads are filled with revisionist history by the members of the social compact that control the centers of public education, within or around the locale of the social compact known as the United States. We have continually been redacted to encourage worship, adoration, and subservience to government authority. All their school teachers out there who have ever tried to deviate from the forced instructional materials in their controlled government schools know that if you don't toe the line, you are forced into retirement. What would you think if your friends and neighbors started a cult following after McDonald's Corporation? What if on every anniversary since the founding of McDonald's, they gathered together to have a barbecue and shoot off fireworks because they thought that Big Mac set them free, or took special days off during the year to celebrate Ronald McDonald's birthday and carved busts of Ronald at Mount Rushmore to honor him? They would fly the McDonald's corporate flag outside their homes and paste stickers of the flag on their vehicles. What if every time executives for McDonald's ran for office and sent in campaign contributions for their favorite candidate? Periodically, they might even call on the officers of the corporation to solve problems that they were experiencing in their daily lives. Whereas this sounds sacrilegious, absurd, and may even appear to stretch the bounds of making an appropriate analogy, it is no less valid or logical. In fact, if it weren't for certain unrevealed contracts and a whole lot of brainwashing, United States Inc. would have no more influence, power, or jurisdiction over you than McDonald's, IBM, General Motors, or for that matter, any other corporation. America has been under an evolving military occupation since 1871. The flag that is flown around the so-called nation in public places, and by people who celebrate the occupation, is the war flag of United States. If there were such a thing as a peacetime flag, it is presumed that it would be a neutral white banner flag and no other, such as the type of flag that is commonly referred to as a truce flag. Notice that the title of this video doesn't include the word "the." Just as General Motors doesn't imply a plural number of motors, United States does not imply a plural number of states. There is nothing plural about the contemporary use of the term. United States is a singular proper noun, and correct usage does not include the antecedent definite article, the. United States is a corporate trade name like General Motors, and identifies a corporation, albeit federal and municipal, but a corporation nevertheless. Just as proper English doesn't include the Canada, the Finland, or the Egypt, it likewise does not include the United States. A far more accurate indicator would be the state of United States. We read of the state of Great Britain in the Declaration of Independence. We hear of the state of Israel in the news. The proper recital of the name United States identifies the for-profit, bankrupt, commercial enterprise in Washington, D.C., presently managed by the receiver in bankruptcy, Secretary of the Treasury of Puerto Rico, aka Secretary of the Treasury. The United States is a slyly concocted solecism, a violation of grammatical rules, or of the approved idiomatic usage of language, that plants in the mind the notion that its identity is merged with the states, when in fact it is foreign to the Compact Party states. To fully answer the question, what is the United States, its forbidden history and the very presumption for supporting it, that we are free, must first be examined. We will forego our opinions for the moment and examine the record. If you sincerely believe that you are free from bondage because you can't see, hear, taste, smell, or touch it, then you will understand after completing this video that your awareness of this possibility is not a necessary condition for its existence. Contrary to popular opinion, all that those who fought and died for in the war for independence was rendered null and void just a few short years after the battle ended. The British soldiers were recalled, but the bankers were not. The so-called United States is but a tool, a Trojan horse, if you will, and you are the subject of those who control it, for the money kings who are the ancient money changers of modern-day money mechanics. As a backdrop to the so-called American Revolution, here is a brief overview of the economic forces that were being unleashed in Britain around the time of the Revolution. It provides important background and insight for you to understand that the money kings use everyone and everything as pawns, including governments, in a world game of monopoly. They never operate out in the light of day. They prefer anonymity. You can only know them through their agents and their state apparatus of their countries they control. The following information examines their methods of operation, modus operandi, and the strategies behind them. The economic juggernaut these money kings set in motion toppled everything in its wake, including the fledgling New Republic. Ask yourself while you watch this, do you see evidence of these same practices operating in your world today? The money power of the world entered upon a new and grander era of development when steam was applied to manufactures. In 1774, Mr. Watt perfected the steam engine. This new servant of man, mightier than the genii of Oriental fable, was at once set to work propelling manufactures. The power loom, the spinning jenny, and the cotton gin were soon afterward invented, giving a great impulse to the steam manufacturing industry. The conditions of the time threw steam manufactures entirely into the hands of the London money power. Great Britain was the only country in Europe which had coal and iron for steam purposes. The capitalists of the East India Company were the only people in the world with capital to engage in the new industry. The great trading companies of other countries had been broken down by British conquests. Enriched by the trade of the Orient and the tropics, these London capitalists at once seized the opportunity events offered them. Chance serves a prepared mind and embarked energetically in steam manufactures. The East India Company, as such, did not engage in these manufactures. All the stockholders would not wish to invest in them, so large a corporation would be unwieldy. The immensity of the monopoly might excite alarm and provoke opposition. It would serve them better to operate through smaller corporations. A few capitalists might hold the stock of a great number of them without exciting jealousy, and their management would be quiet and easy. The different corporations were like the regiments of an army. It was easy to form them into brigades and divisions and army corps in order to give them the compact solidity of a grand military organization. They built manufactories of all kinds. They started iron mills, woolen mills, and cotton mills. Manufactures of all kinds sprung up everywhere. The money kings organized new joint stock corporations which built mills and manufactories. New companies operated mines of coal and iron, as commerce energetically expanded through manufactures wrought by steam power. They organized new companies which built vessels to plow the waters of every ocean and built new warehouses. They established new trading stations all over the earth. Commerce had languished in previous ages because the domed, computer-simulated flat Earth's temperate zone did not have sufficiently cheap products suited to tropical demand to offer in exchange for tropical productions. Steam manufacturers opened up a new commercial era. They greatly stimulated tropical production by offering manufactures in those markets. They also greatly stimulated industry in the temperate zone. In all the countries of the temperate zone, the demand for the manufactures of Britain was far beyond the ability to pay for them with exports. The first effect of this state of things was a wave of excitement that swept over Great Britain. An industrial boom was started. Everybody had money invested in the stock of manufacturing companies, shipping companies, trading companies. The money kings took care to have the majority of stock outside companies for steam manufacturers they knew they could devour at their leisure. The Grand Money Kings had such advantages in their immense capital and in their perfect organization that in commercial crises often originated and always manipulated by them, they managed systematically to break down rival companies and buy them out. They robbed and plundered the minority stockholders. In the end, these organized capitalists got into their own hands, and for a pittance of the true value, all or the greater part of, the stock of the various companies, manufacturing, mercantile, and shipping that originated in steam manufactures. They thus reduced to a system and a science the art of crushing rival companies and freezing out minority stockholders. Their whole career was a systematic course of treachery, fraud, and plunder without a parallel in history. They advanced step by step, always causing a boom in every new enterprise that enlisted much outside capital, always managing to operate within seasons of business disaster. They lost a few 100,000 by falling prices, a loss which they were abundantly able to stand while making many millions by obtaining cheaply the stock of broken corporations and the stock sold by minority stockholders. Dealing in futures and boards of trade was then started on a grand scale. This system originated for the purpose of enabling large capitalists to force stocks up or down as they chose by dint of capital, without any regard to the actual value. The most satanic engine of trickery, fraud, and oppression ever devised to enable the strong to plunder the weak. It is the dragnet with which the money kings destroy multitudes of men of small means. Like the fisherman takes fish in his sea, they are fishermen, and the rest of mankind is their prey. They are always seeking after spoil. They are always dragging their net for the destruction of the unwary. But aside from this plunder of the weak and the trusting, the regular profits of the new age of industry were very large. In every social construct or compact of the temperate zone, the ongoing demand for British manufactures was much greater than could be paid for by exports. The difference in the balance of trade was always systematically arranged by lending money on mortgage for that amount, or by spending the amount of the deficit in starting some business enterprise in that locale of so-called country. In this way, the adverse balance of trade was not felt by the economic community of the locality falling behind. It bought all it wanted, and the adverse balance of trade actually made times better, for it caused the profits of the money kings to be invested in the so-called country, stimulating business into activity. The disadvantage was the business investment did not belong to the so-called nation, but to the money kings, and the prosperity it caused was not national prosperity, but was the bloated gains of the money kings. The regular method of the money kings for the last 100 years has been to start new manufacturers, new shipping companies, new trading companies, gather in all the outside capital possible, freeze out minority stockholders, and throttle outside corporations. This effectively indebted all nations to them. First, they would make parasitic investments equal to the amount of the deficit of the balance of trade. This was done by putting in the profits derived from the East India Company. Then, after investing these profits, they would continually reinvest any future profits of all their enterprises in each and every country until their investments accumulated like rolling balls of snow, to at last become an avalanche under which to bury the prosperity of the world. Approximately 3% of the Confederate population participated in one of the bloodiest wars in history, and allegedly won their independence. They understood the historical roots of war, injustice, and oppression because they experienced it first-hand knowledge, which has since been lost to posterity. The victors' history books do indeed leave out much truth and lied about much of the rest to justify the outcome and to control the future labor pool to the victors' wants and needs within such conquered areas. The primary reason for the war for independence was not taxation without representation, but the forced payment of taxes to the king in gold instead of paper money. America was flourishing by using her own fiat money system based only on production, not a gold-based system that could be manipulated by the king. The king could not control the fiat money system and therefore passed a law requiring that taxes be paid in gold only. The king had most of the gold. The colonies had little, so unemployment ensued. The embittered colonists cried for war. Benjamin Franklin put it this way: the colonies would have gladly borne the little tax on tea and other matters, had it not been that England took away from the colonies their money. Prior to the Revolutionary War, 1774, the Times of London said this regarding fiat money in America. If this mischievous financial policy, which has its origins in North America, shall become indurated down to a fixture, then that government will furnish its own money without cost. It will pay off debts and be without debt. It will have all the money necessary to carry on its commerce. It will become prosperous without precedent in the history of the world. The brains and the wealth of all the countries will go to North America. That country must be destroyed, or it will destroy every monarchy on the globe. The truth is that the revolution failed. You might say that we won a military victory over the most powerful military force on the planet at the time. However, reading the Treaty of Paris, signed the winter of 1782, it becomes clear that we were not exactly negotiating as equals. We had won the recall of British troops, but not the bankers. Even though we are taught that we won our independence from England, we actually were able to remain free from the international bankers for only a few years at the close of the presidency of Andrew Jackson. The most visible of the power structure was the East India Company, owned by the bankers and the Crown in London, England. This was an entirely private enterprise whose flag was adopted by Queen Elizabeth in 1600 that consisted of 13 red and white horizontal stripes with a blue rectangle in its upper left-hand corner. All debts owed before the war were to be collected by the foreign creditors, trading companies, by and through the custom houses run by these trading companies. This practice goes on to this very day throughout Earth. When the creditors of the new social compact of the so-called the United States of America as a nation-state found the Articles of Confederation to be inadequate to exact payment from their young debtor, the Constitution was written. This document put into operation the Treaty of Paris and those ongoing amendments thereto. It was supported by the bankers through their associates to increase their control over the social compact known as the United States of America. Had the Articles of Confederation been completed and adopted instead of the Constitution, the bankers would have had far less control over the signatories to the social compact or to their posterity in the future. Any constitution must have some prior reference to establish its foundation. The authority for the so-called American Constitution is alleged to be based upon the Bible, the Magna Charta, signed in 1215 by King John, the Petition of Rights granted by King Charles I in 1628, the English Bill of Rights granted by William and Mary in 1689, the right of habeas corpus granted by King Charles II, and the Articles of Confederation, 1781. And accordingly, any and every constitution thereafter must have an enabling clause. From this point onward, no constitution may diminish in any manner those rights already established in the above 6 documents relative to the social compact to which it referred and to whom such was created by or for other than by such powers as enumerated for such causes as might be demonstrated. The beneficiaries thereof may and of right collectively establish according to principles by which any previous social compact was established to begin with, may reinstitute new safeguards for their freedom, liberty, and pursuit of happiness for themselves and their posterity, laying its foundations upon such principles as they shall see fit to secure these benefits unto themselves. The Declaration of Independence declared universally to a candid world that all people were sovereign under the Creator's natural law when they took upon themselves the mantle of sovereignty, singularly, jointly, and severally, and assumed among the powers of earth their separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's creator entitle them. These sovereign people of the various e-states of flat plain earth created their separate and equal state body corporate governments for the protection of their rights in a union, marriage, of the several states, to better serve these ends for themselves and their posterity. These endeavors in union sought foreign alliance to better firm up their collective relationship to the various social compacts of the time in the interest of goodwill and peace within the international public order of the day. They delegated certain authority from the people's power, those signatory to the founding documents creating the social compact, by and through the several state constitutions in order that the three branches of agency government could properly carry out the dictates outlined in the state constitutions to protect their rights in relation to foreign exchange that might arise from time to time by the formality of treaty. The so-called American Constitution created a new structure of central agency government that was established on a much higher plane than either the parliamentary system or the Confederation of States when delegating agency powers for foreign purposes as delineated by the social compact to govern such agency power. It was a people's constitutional republic, where a certain amount of power was reserved to the states and a certain amount was delegated to the federal agency government. The so-called Agency United States, by way of the United States in Congress assembled, has certain powers delegated by the Constitution. So far as the several states party to the Constitution are concerned, the United States may not exercise power that is not delegated by the Constitution. All power not delegated to the United States by the Constitution is reserved to the several states within their respective territorial borders or to the signatory and/or their posterity currently living people. Even though the Treaty of Paris allegedly ended the open Revolutionary War in 1783, it did not covertly stop the Crown and their money kings from subverting the newly found political structure by whatever means possible. Simply put, the fact of the continuing existence of the social compact as it was designed threatened the monarchies and money kings where it hurt most financially, by a collective of sovereign people by and through their state body corporate governments and central agency government. It effectively severed the nexus third-party attachment if properly attended with respect to the sovereign people behind the veil of the corporation so established. But where in history have any people kept eternal vigilance, either of themselves or for their posterity or their posterity when times are easy, after the sacrifice and success of their forefathers? The sovereign people, forefathers of the social compact, had paid close attention to how the crown and money kings had used corporations to plunder the people, and hidden itself behind this veil to limit the money kings and crown's liability arising via tort. This was because of the money kings and crown's avarice desire to rule all walks of life, whether such people fell within the moral jurisdiction of the crowns or not. The forefathers who created the social compact known as the United States of America, in turn reversed the use of corporations to protect themselves and their posterity from the crown to their benefit. The so-called United States stood as a heroic role model for a short time for other weaker social compacts across Earth, which inspired them to also struggle against oppressive money kings and monarchies. The French Revolution of 1789 to 1799 and the Polish Uprising of 1794 were in part encouraged by the so-called American Revolution. Locally speaking, we the people stood like a beacon of hope for most of the world. The money kings and monarchies regarded the so-called United States as a political infection, the principal source of radical Republican democracy that was destroying the money kings and monarchies, more importantly, the money kings, the power behind the crowns across Earth. Knowing they couldn't destroy us militarily, they resorted to more covert methods of political and financial subversion, employing spies and secret agents attorneys, skilled in bribery and legal deception. This was perhaps the first Cold War. In the 1794 Jay Treaty, the United States agreed to pay £600,000 sterling to King George III as reparations for the so-called American Revolution, which came about not from any one people of the so-called Americas damaging the crown, but because the crown and money kings had sought to invade the private lives of all walks of life without real representation. The U.S. Senate ratified the treaty in secret session and ordered that it not be published. When Benjamin Franklin's grandson published it anyway, perhaps our first whistleblower, The exposure and resulting public uproar so angered the Congress that it passed the Alien and Sedition Acts of 1780. None, so that federal judges could prosecute editors and publishers for reporting the truth about the government. Since they supposedly had won the Revolutionary War, why would their senators agree to pay reparations to the loser? Why would they agree to pay £600,000 sterling 11 years after the war ended? It doesn't make sense, especially in light of the Senate's secrecy and later fury over being exposed, unless we assume their senators, attorneys, had been bribed or were already in the service thereof to serve the money kings and British monarchy to betray the so-called American people. That is treason only in regards to the intents and purposes of the original creators of the social compact, and the then and after living posterity thereof. From the beginning, the United States Bank had been opposed by the Democratic Republicans led by Thomas Jefferson, but the Federalists, the pro-monarchy party, won the vote in 1796. The initial capitalization was $10 million, 80% of which would be owned by foreign bankers. Since the bank was authorized to lend up to $20 million, double its paid capital, it was a profitable deal for both government and the bankers, since they could lend and collect interest on $10 million that did not exist. However, the European bankers outfoxed the agency U.S. government. By 1796, the agency U.S. government owed the bank $6,200,000 and was forced to sell most of its shares. By 1802, our government owned no stock in the United States Bank. Thomas Jefferson gave the following warning in 1802: if the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, the banks will deprive the people of all property until their children wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered. The issuing power should be taken from the banks and restored to the people to whom it properly belonged.
Chief among the international financiers was Amschel Bauer of Germany, who, in 1748, opened a goldsmith shop under the name of Red Shield. In German, the name is spelled Rothschild and is pronounced Rothschild. In 1787, Amschel Bauer Rothschild made the famous statement, "Let me issue and control a nation's money, and I care not who writes the laws." He had 5 sons, Amschel Mayer, Solomon, Jacob, Nathan, and Karl. In 1798, the 5 Rothschild brothers expanded by opening banks in Germany, Vienna, Paris, London, and Naples. The objective behind these bankers was to establish a clearinghouse warehouse bank, which was to receive special privilege and immunity to use the unjust fractional reserve banking in order to print money and loan it to the agency government and corporate industry charter via the corporate agency government. No beneficial interest could accrue from any beneficial use from any circulation of any note generated via the charter. This was established by the agency United States for the purpose of servicing the debt of the corporate United States and for the purpose of transferring the liability of the accrued debt, which had never been extinguished since the 1770s, forward without interest being paid to the fiscal agent bankers of the Crown. Through these schemes, the corporate agency government contrived to pass the liability through adhesion contracts to other walks of life under various new deals to discharge thereon debts to the Crown. One of the very simple schemes foisted upon the people at large was fractional reserve banking. It is simply a special privilege given to a man or group of men to create credit out of thin air. The schemes are executed by extending this credit debt to any and everyone else in or found about a loosely associated people closely associated with a particular society or social compact. By and through such misrepresentations perpetrated upon such walks of life, which do not have the same access to the same privileges or immunities that the creator of the social compact or their posterity have, and thereby are burdened with paying the collecting fees from servicing the alleged debt of the social compact, the assumed value of money and the attached plus interest for the cost of the use of the units created to discharge in tender of debt thereof. Due to the beneficial interest created by the use of such instruments created by fractional reserve banking, the crown and money kings become very rich, and the agency government is allowed to continue to legally discharge its debt and service their liability without having to produce anything of value other than to attorn such property by and through such attorneys of the crown from the unaware populace not familiar with the principles of discharge, contractually speaking, which is only a viable option to those which exercise credibility to expatriate from such assumed nexus with such social compact and its liability, and repatriate according to the principles of international public order into such society to which they become a creative signatory member thereof to such social compact, thereby creating a nexus for their safety, liberty, and pursuit of happiness by creating a hereditary birthright and standing to which their posterity may acquire by birth as well. The basic mathematics behind the fractional banking system is very clear. If this system is left in place long enough, the man or group who controls this system of debt creation will own all the gold available in the social compact, however known as a nation, state, kingdom, or otherwise. Once the supply of real portable specie money, gold or silver or whatever the medium of exchange, whether money of account or money of exchange, species, is in his or their hands, this man or group of men becomes the master of the entire economic field of endeavor of such social compact. Why? Because this man or group of men controls the only source of operating medium, money, however defined, available through which the social compact functions to discharge debt. Only the man who has the privilege of printing and or minting the money and loaning or extending such as interest can determine who gets special drawing rights, funding his friends and allies. Everyone else is limited to how much money of account or exchange they have access to. Therefore, after 2 or 3 generations, the friends and allies of this banker will own all of the energy of such social compact. This present condition is being played out in the so-called American society and is now owned by a small cadre of very wealthy men throughout the earth. This same scheme of fractional reserve manipulation is being played out throughout all of the various political social constructs worldwide with one aim: world domination of each and every resource to which the earth can produce for their selfish benefit, including the absolute control of each and every living soul upon the earth to be forced economically into serving solely the private interests and gain of the money kings. How long the fractional banking process takes to work its way through the wealth of any social compact depends upon how successful the banker is in forcing, through bribery and corruption, the restriction of the formal agency government's issuance of real money backed by gold or silver or such other medium of account or exchange. Species currency is put into circulation to honestly and truly pay debt or discharge whatever liability is acquired, which may or may not arise when one increases one's estate through the benefit of their efforts and labor, as most people evidently wish to. Was this not the American dream? Furthermore, as the supply of real money shrinks, the people of any social compact are forced to rely on the creation of a fictitious debt by the privileged few to a greater and greater extent, until finally, the only thing left is a massive amount of unpayable debt, with no way to lawfully discharge their acquired debt, which was created from nothing and consists only of the interest charged upon the fictitious debt, while collecting interest for every moment of its existence. All this for the benefit of the privileged, who become the de facto, illegally usurped agency government because of the money power they allow to be wielded by and through the social compact. Few are ever aware of the true damages done to their estates, or that of such estate to which may or may not be possible to pass by hereditary right, so to speak, and the debt which, if not lawfully discharged back to the original source or creator of the debt, passes on to future generations of their posterity, creating a continuous debtor-class people, subjects now of the money kings, to the whims of a foreign, despotic, tyrannical power. Through the Bank of England, the Rothschilds, the money kings demanded, did you ever wonder how they could make such a demand of the crown, a private bank in the so-called United States, to hold the securities of the United States as the pledged assets to the Crown of England in order to secure the debt to which the signatories of the Social Compact by and through their agency government had defaulted? As one of his first acts, President Washington declared a financial emergency. William Morris, with the help of Alexander Hamilton, Secretary of Treasury, heavily promoted the creation of a private bankers' clearinghouse, Custom House, to service the debt to the international bankers. In 1791, Congress chartered the first national bank, Bankers' Clearinghouse, for a term of 20 years to hold the securities of the same European bankers who had been holding the debts before the war. The bankers loaned worthless, unbacked, non-secured printed money of account to each other to charter this first bank. On December 12, 1791, the Bank of the United States opened its doors in Philadelphia. The holders of the securities were the private bankers, so under public international law, the creditor, Crown of England, forced the so-called United States to establish a private bankers' clearinghouse, warehouse, to hold the securities as the collateral for the Social Compact's so-called national debt. James Madison had warned, history records that the money changers have used every form of abuse, intrigue, deceit, and violent means possible to maintain their control over governments by controlling money and its issuance. From the early decades of U.S. history, relations between the United States and Great Britain remained strained. Their relationship deteriorated sharply with the outbreak of war in Europe in 1803. Britain imposed a blockade on neutral social compact countries such as the United States. In addition, the British took people acting under an agency status as American sailors from their ships and forced them to serve in the British Navy. Concerned about the many English spies and troublemakers, the United States and Congress assembled, passed an amendment to prevent those who had English titles and connections from obtaining any seat in government, called the Titles of Nobility Act of 1810, that reads as follows: If any citizen of the United States shall accept, claim, receive, or retain any title of nobility or honor, or shall, without the consent of Congress, accept and retain any present, pension, office, or emolument of any kind whatever, from any emperor, king, prince, or foreign power, such person shall cease to be a citizen of the United States, and shall be incapable of holding any office of trust or profit under them, or either of them. This Congressional Titles of Nobility Act was later to amend the U.S. Constitution as the original 13th Amendment, which led to the War of 1812 with Great Britain. Furthermore, it took the Civil War to officially force the gradual replacement of this amendment to be taken from all reference from every state published record with what is now known as the Slavery Amendment, or the amendment created as an act against involuntary servitude of 1863, a wartime act passed under martial law. All titles of nobility were prohibited in both Article 6 of the Articles of Confederation of the United States of America in 1777 and in Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution of the United States in 1778, but there was no penalty. Although already prohibited by the Constitution, an additional title of nobility amendment was deemed necessary and was proposed in 1789, again in 1810, and finally ratified in 1819. But the notice of ratification delivered to the Secretary of State, an attorney with the title Esquire, disappeared. As a result, there still is no penalty for accepting titles or emoluments from foreign rulers today, just the prohibition. Clearly, the Founding Fathers saw such a serious threat in titles of nobility and honors that anyone receiving them would be required to forfeit their citizenship. Obviously, the amendment carried much more significance for their Founding Fathers than is readily apparent today. The forefathers knew that their freedom and that of their posterity could be subverted from inside their agency government, and had sought to prevent such a bitter betrayal. Today, most senators, congressmen, all federal judges, and most of their presidents are attorneys who carry the title Esquire, often abbreviated as ESQ. Nevertheless, the U.S. Constitution still forbids this. In colonial America, attorneys trained attorneys, but most held no title of nobility or honor. There was no requirement that one be a lawyer to hold the position of district attorney, attorney general, or judge. A citizen's council of choice was not restricted to a lawyer, and there were no state or national bar associations. The only organization that certified lawyers was the International Bar Association, chartered by the King of England, known as the British Accreditation Registry, headquartered in London and recognized everywhere as the Bar. Lawyers admitted to the International Bar Association, or otherwise Bar, as it is most readily known everywhere, received the rank Esquire, a title of British nobility. Esquire was the principal title of nobility that the 13th Amendment sought to prohibit from exercising any office within the United States. Why? Because the loyalty of Esquire lawyers was suspect. Lawyers with an Esquire behind their names were agents of the money changers and the monarchy, and members of an organization whose principal purposes were political and regarded with the same wariness that some people today reserve for members of the KGB or the CIA. The archaic definition of honor as used when the 13th Amendment was ratified meant anyone obtaining or having an advantage or privilege over another. A contemporary example of an honor granted to only a few Americans is the privilege of being a judge. Lawyers can be judges and exercise the attendant privileges and powers. Non-lawyers generally cannot. We address the judge as Your Honor. By prohibiting honors, the missing but now found original 13th Amendment prohibits any advantage or privilege that would grant some citizens an unequal opportunity to achieve or exercise political power. Therefore, the second meaning, intent of the original 13th Amendment was to ensure political equality among all citizens of the United States by prohibiting anyone, even government officials, from claiming or exercising a special privilege or power and honor over other citizens. Now, what would happen if this amendment were enforced? It would cause an immediate chaos in all three branches of the agency federal government, and the same in each and every state of the union, because these same attorneys sit in every seat of power throughout every level of the social compact for the sole purpose of enforcing the mandates of the money kings and the Crown of England, even upon those people to whom the alleged original debt was incurred by. That has absolutely nothing to do with either said people or through any nexus of the social compact to which their forefathers had accepted the liability of such debt in the 1770s. Nor does any people not signatory or evidencing any hereditary privileges as their posterity incur any liability for such debt by any stretch of the imaginings of such perfidious attorneys who practice their pettifoggery upon all walks of life by and through such frauds perpetrated upon them by these leeches of the ancient money changers, living upon the economic well-being of any and all societies known as attorneys. Both Esquire and honor would be key targets of the 13th Amendment even today. Because, while titles of nobility no longer apply now precisely as they did back in the early 1800s, it is clear that an Esquire or BAR attorney receives far better treatment than a layman in and by their courts, as well as by the public at large in general. Whereas, if you represent yourself pro per, in se, or speak as a sovereign in proprius personam, you are treated as though you are rabble. Your opinions are of little importance in their courts, and you are more than often treated similarly by such agency government officials. Because you are not an Esquire or BR attorney, you are considered to be a useless eater, a subject out of control. The concept of honor remains relevant, possibly more so today than at any previous time in United States history, for they, the honors, are greatly feared and even revered, even by their esquires who are considered to be below them. Since the original 13th Amendment has never been repealed, all acts of their government since 1819 are technically null and void. Most so-called lawmakers are attorneys and are prohibited from participation in any office of government by the true amended social compact contract known as the United States Constitution. Thereby, every attorney should be stripped of his or her appearance of right to hold any office as an agent representing any so-called citizen of the United States under the Titles of Nobility Act, who have continued to interject themselves into the political process solely for their benefit of gainful pillaging and plunder. When people discovered that European banking interests owned most of the United States Bank, where they deposited their hard-earned savings, they saw the sheer power of the banks and their ability to influence representative government by economic manipulation and outright bribery. On February 20th, 1811, Congress therefore refused to renew the bankers' charter on the grounds that the bank was unconstitutional. This led to the withdrawal of $7 million in specie, money and coin, by European investors, which in turn precipitated an economic recession and the War of 1812. This war was punishment for the United States and Congress assembled, refusing under the pressure of people becoming aware of this manipulation to do business on the terms of the international banking families of the House of Rothschild through the First Bank of the United States. Congress refused to let the National Bank renew its charter, fearing for their safety. Except for General Andrew Jackson's victory in the Battle of New Orleans, the War of 1812 produced a string of American military disasters. The most shocking of these was the British Army's burning of the Capitol, the President's House, the Library of Congress, and other public buildings in Washington on August 24th and 25th, 1814. Americans had previously burned public buildings in Canada. During the War of 1812, so-called National Archives of the United States and many libraries and document repositories were burned, and some of the evidence of the Titles of Nobility Act disappeared. Nevertheless, the legislature of Virginia ratified the amendment, and it was subsequently printed in many official publications as the 13th Amendment, even in states which had not ratified, such as Connecticut and several states that came into the Union later in history. Beginning in 1832, it began to disappear from texts, although official state publications continued to publish it as late as 1876. There are undoubtedly other examples of the money kings and the monarchy's efforts to subvert or destroy the so-called social compact known as the United States. Some are common knowledge, while others remain to be disclosed to the public. For example, National Archivist David Dodge discovered a book called 2 VA Law in the Library of Congress Law Library. According to Dodge, this is an uncatalogued book in the rare book section that reveals a plan to overthrow the constitutional government by secret agreements engineered by the lawyers of the time. That is one of the reasons why the Titles of Nobility Act was ratified by the state of Virginia in the particular manner in which they did, although the alleged notification thereof was a long time thereafter claimed to have been lost in the mail. You see, there is no public record that this book exists either. That may sound surprising, but according to the Gazette May 10, 1991, the Library of Congress has 349,402 uncatalogued rare books and 14 million uncatalogued rare manuscripts. There might be secrets buried in that mass of documents even more astonishing than a missing constitutional amendment. Yet this image of documentary disarray appropriately describes our situation today. We are inundated with useless information, while we are misdirected from information that we have not had the time or interest to sort through. As a result, we have lost a precious treasure in the chaos and turmoil of daily life: our sovereignty. One amazing aspect of the War of 1812 was the existence of a depression during wartime. War always brings a short-term prosperity, except in the case of this war. To understand this, it is vital for you to know that all depressions and recessions are artificially created through the restriction of a medium of accounting or exchange, money. This restriction keeps so-called money out of circulation, which means fewer funds available to facilitate production and distribution. Furthermore, this means poverty and starvation for all walks of life not privy to such plunder. The precariousness of agency government finance during the war and the post-war recession convinced the Republican agency government under James Madison to reestablish a so-called national bank. Thus was created the Second Bank of the United States in 1816. On January 9, 1832, the Second National Bank applied for a charter renewal 4 years early. This time, President Andrew Jackson vetoed the bank's recharter on the grounds that the bank was unconstitutional, and he successfully paid off the national debt, leaving the U.S. with a surplus of $5,000. He said, if Congress has the right under the Constitution to issue paper money, it was given them to use themselves, not to be delegated to individuals or corporations. On January 30th, 1835, President Andrew Jackson attended a congressional funeral in the Capitol building. As he exited, Richard Lawrence, an unemployed house painter, pointed a pistol at Jackson and fired. The percussion cap exploded, but the bullet did not discharge. The enraged Jackson raised his cane to strike his attacker, who fired again. The second weapon also misfired, and the 67-year-old president escaped assassination at close range. Jackson was convinced that Lawrence was hired by his political enemies, the Whigs, to stop his plan to destroy the Bank of the United States. Andrew Jackson violated public international law because he denied the creditor his just lien settlement rights on from the debtor. However, the bankers did not lend value, substance, so in actuality they had an unperfected lien. Therefore, the law actually did not apply. In 1861, the Southern states walked out of the United States in Congress assembled. This created Sine Die, a situation in which not enough representatives were present to carry on legislative business. This was a constitutional crisis that the newly elected president, Abraham Lincoln, had to resolve. The introduction to Senate Report 93, 549, 93rd Congress, First Session, 1973, summarizes the situation as best as possible. A majority of the people of the United States have lived all of their lives under emergency rule. And in the United States, actions taken by the government in times of great crises have, from at least the Civil War in important ways, shaped the present phenomenon of a permanent state of national emergency. From the U.S. congressional research information available, it can be reasonably proven that when the representatives of the Southern Compact Party, members of the States of the Union, walked out of United States in Congress, assembled on March 27, 1861, the quorum to conduct business under the social compact contract known as the United States Constitution for the United States of America was lost. Thus, the only votes that the remaining representatives of the United States in Congress assembled could lawfully take under parliamentary law were those to set the time to reconvene, take a vote to get a quorum, and vote to adjourn and set a date, time, and place to reconvene at a later time. Instead, the remaining representatives of the United States in Congress assembled apparently abandoned the Representative House and Senate of the United States without setting a date to reconvene. Under the parliamentary procedures of said Congress, when this happened, Congress became Sine Die, pronounced Sine Die, literally without day, and thus, when Congress adjourned Sine Die, it ceased to exist as a lawful deliberative body, and thus the only lawful constitutional power that could declare war was no longer lawful or in session. It can also be reasonably proven that the representative Southern members of the several states of the Union, by virtue of their secession from the Union, also ceased to exist Sine Die, and that some state legislatures in the Northern Bloc also adjourned Sine Die, and thus, all the states which were parties to creating the social compact contract known as the United States Constitution for the United States of America apparently ceased to exist. On April 15, 1861, so-called President Abraham Lincoln executed an executive order as Commander-in-Chief, Lincoln Executive Proclamation 1, and it can also be reasonably proven that the United States of America have been ruled ever since by these same military executive powers denoted as executive orders. It can also be reasonably proven that when a supposed Congress eventually did reconvene, it was reconvened under the military authority of the Commander-in-Chief and not by rules of order for parliamentary bodies or by so-called contractual constitutional law, thus placing the so-called each and every people under martial rule ever since the national emergency declared by President Lincoln. Thus, the so-called Constitution for the United States of America has subsequently and temporarily ceased being the acknowledged law of the land in many courts. The assumed title of President, the assumed title of Congress, and the assumed jurisdiction of the courts thereof have unlawfully presumed that they were free to remake the Union in a new image under the so-called law of necessity, whereas, lawfully, no such constitutional provisions were or are in place which afforded power to any of the actions which were taken which presumed to place the Union under the new form of control or designation as a democracy. The so-called President, Abraham Lincoln, apparently knew that his executive orders no longer had any force under contractual constitutional law. So he commissioned General Orders No. 100 on April 24, 1863, apparently as a special code to govern his actions under martial law and to justify the seizure of power. This further extended the laws of the District of Columbia and also fictionally implemented the provisions of Article 1, Section 8, Clauses 17 and 18 of the defunct contract known as the Constitution, beyond the boundaries of Washington, D.C. and illegitimately into the several states, no longer united under the central agency government of the United States. General Orders No. 100, also called the Lieber Instructions and the Lieber Code, have apparently extended the laws of war and private international law into the so-called several states of the Union. The defunct agency United States government assumed power and become the presumed military conqueror of all the people to which it could bend its will by misrepresentation over the land of the former several states of the Union. Martial rule has apparently been kept secret and has never really ended. Lincoln was assassinated before he could complete the implementation of his plan to constitutionally and not militarily reform the Southern agency governments and restore the United States in Congress assembled. Ever since, the so-called social compact known as the United States of America has been ruled under military law under the assumed and illegitimate Commander-in-Chief, the President and his assumed executive powers, according to the policies of executive orders of a non-existent social compact via a military dictator type of functionary for the money kings and the Crown of England, under the law of necessity, according to the principles of international public order. Constitutional law under the original social compact for the several states of the Union is apparently enforced only as a matter of keeping the public peace under the provisions of General Orders No. 100 under martial law rule. This peace is further evidenced in the preamble of the so-called Expatriation Act of 1868. Under martial law, title is a mere fiction, since all property belongs to the military except for that property which the Commander-in-Chief may, in his benevolence, exempt from taxation and seizure, and upon which he allows the enemy to reside.